Can you two sit nearby? Yeah, I don't want to separate you, but it's just, yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Is audio going well? Yeah. It has been quite the appointed time this past few days. It's been quite the special time, quite the somehow simultaneously refreshing and exhausting. I don't know how that works, but it happened. So the social engagements are special, the times of recreation are special, and most of all, the presence of God by His Spirit, the indwelling of the Father and the Son by their Spirit is incredibly special. So I invite you to kneel and or bow your heads with me for prayer. Father, we come before you as your children, weak and in need of strength. Some tired, some sick, all sinners, all having sinned, in need of your the cleansing blood of your Son. And I pray that your Spirit would be with us as we explore this subject of such significance, and that you would give me supernatural strength in this physical condition that I am in, and help me to speak truth in love, I pray. Amen. Okay, so I'm quite fond of words. Words are really powerful, and small distinctions between words matter. As you can see on the screen, just as is being illustrated, there is a distinction between recreation and vain amusement. There is also a significant distinction between the one-letter difference of the word rubies and the word rabies. There's here we have rubies. I don't know why it's not. Let's see. There's the rabies. For some reason there's a slide missing. I'm not sure why. But that slide, on it says, "Let's eat grandma." And it's at the end? Oh, wait. Oh, there we have it. Thank you. I doubled up the title slide because I wanted to touch on that. So you see on the screen it says, "Let's eat grandma," which is a very, very sinister suggestion, and the much more pleasant "let's eat, comma, grandma," which is an invitation to eat together with your grandmother. So the joke or the humor here is that punctuation saves lives. So if there is such a distinction between these two statements, these two sentences, there also is a distinction between rubies and rabies. You can see there's a clear difference between these precious gems and this potentially rabid raccoon. So before we go to Luke 2:52, we're actually going to turn to the book of James. If someone knows where it is, I actually don't have the reference memorized. It came to me that I wanted to reference it after I'd made my slideshow. It's in the book of James. It's where we talk about faith without works. So it is written that faith without works is dead. And thank you. So in James 2:18, we see that it is written, "Yea." Let's start in 17. "Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. It is written, the words of Christ are recorded, and it is written that out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. And if our words are an index of our heart, how much more can we say that our actions reveal our character? For it is also written in the writings of Sister White that thoughts work out actions, repeated actions form habits, and habits form character. Elsewhere it is written that character determines our destiny. So when we have a thought to pursue some vain amusement, when we have a thought of lust, it is in that instant that our very destiny is on the line, because we need to respond to that thought and not let that thought become action if it is sin. For if it is sin, and the sin brings forth fruit into action, and that action repeated forms a habit, sin becomes our character, and sin cannot be in the presence of a loving God. How much is it then that God loves us, that he so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that so whosoever believeth in him might not perish but have eternal, everlasting life. So now we will go to Luke 2:52. I welcome a volunteer if someone wants to read it. Someone other than maybe, someone else maybe. If you could hand the microphone to someone. Sure, thank you. So here we're going to see a verse pertaining to the childhood of Christ, if I remember correctly.
All right. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man.
Thank you. So Christ is our example, correct? So if we want to see how to live, how to pursue recreation in an appropriate way, let us look first, and I think a good place to start is with the life of the Son of God himself. So next we're going to turn to Ministry of Healing, page 54. We have here, it is written, the childhood of Jesus, spent in poverty, had been uncorrupted by the artificial habits of a corrupt age. If the age was corrupt in the first century, how much more corrupt is it now, 2,000 years later? Working at the carpenter's bench, bearing the burdens of home life, learning the lessons of obedience and toil, he found recreation amidst the scenes of nature, gathering knowledge as he sought to understand nature's mysteries. He studied the Word of God, and his hours of greatest happiness were found when he could turn aside from the scene of his labors to go into the fields, to meditate in the quiet valleys, to hold communion with God on the mountainside or amid the trees of the forest. And we see this described in, there's the reference again. We see this described in the Gospels, where we see a great while before day, not just early, a great while before day, meaning before it was even light, before that first ray of sunshine broke over the hillside, Christ was going to retreat into nature to be refreshed by his God, to be refreshed by time with his Father, to have time of recreation, appreciating the character of God as it was revealed in nature. Could you read this one, Ben?
The early morning often found him in some secluded place, meditating, searching the scriptures, or in prayer. With the voice of singing, he welcomed the morning light. With songs of thanksgiving, he cheered his hours of labor and brought heaven's gladness to the toil-worn and disheartened.
Thank you. So we see that Christ, he wove in his love for others, his love for God, his desire to be a blessing with his very workday. We're going to turn to Mark 6:31. I guess I'll read this one. So in the book of Mark, chapter 6, verse 31, we see this important invitation from Christ, where it is written, "And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place, and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat." How many of us has skipped a meal because we were so busy, occupied for God? Christ himself tells us that there is a line you cross when even in the service of God, you must seek recreation. Many of us think that there is no line, and that's a dangerous place to be. Obadiah?
It was just after the return from their first missionary tour that Jesus bade his disciples come apart and rest a while. The disciples had returned, filled with the joy of their success as heralds of the gospel, when the tidings reached them of the death of John the Baptist at the hand of Herod. It was a bitter sorrow and disappointment. Jesus knew that in leaving the Baptist to die in prison, he had severely tested the disciples' faith.
Thank you. So in this time of great distress, it was recreation that Christ suggested. They were distressed. They were in need. They needed comfort. And the comfort he suggested was to go to a place with less people and to rest. It's a powerful message that's often neglected. The quote continues saying, "With pitying tenderness he looked upon the sorrowful, tear-stained faces. Tears were in his eyes and voices. He said, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while." This appeal is often forgotten. Many people, they blot this message out, "Come ye yourselves apart and rest a while." And if you turn to the last chapter of Mark, you see in Mark 16:15, I easily remember it because it's like it's counting down to something. For it is written in Mark 16:15, "And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Is this true? Should we do this? Yes. Should we also come ye ourselves apart and rest a while? It's also true. And we should not neglect either one of these. We should not be too much in rest or too much in work, and that narrow way in between is the path to life. So Education 277. This message is brought to you by books. I utilized largely 5 books in preparing this study. Adventist Home, Education, which we're about to look at. We already looked at Ministry of Healing, and we're going to look at Testimonies for the Church as well. So Education 277. Ben?
For almost every other qualification that
Talking about teachers. Sorry.
that contributes to his success, the teacher is in great degree dependent upon physical vigor. The better his health, the better will be his work. So wearing are his responsibilities that special effort on his part is required to preserve vigor and freshness.
So this is talking specifically about teachers and assistant teachers, that kind of thing, but are we not all teachers in some capacity? Are we not all called to go and teach all nations? Often he becomes heart-weary and brain-weary, the teacher, with the almost irresistible tendency to depression. When I heard this, I was like my wife and I, we often make the sound like oof. Like it just hit me. Like it was a very sizable oof that I felt, because I was like, this is my life. Like, often becoming heart weary and brain weary with an almost irresistible tendency to depression is my life. And when I read this, I was like, Lord, have mercy. the almost irresistible tendency to depression, coldness, and irritability. And what is the remedy? It is his duty to not merely resist such moods, but to avoid their cause. He needs to keep the heart pure and sweet and trustful and sympathetic in order to always be always firm and calm and cheerful. He must preserve the strength of brain and nerve. Our brain is just as much an organ as our lungs. It is wrong to exhaust the brain. It is wrong. Just as wrong as it is to work your muscles to the point of being totally ripped apart, it is wrong to overuse the brain. Since in his work, quality is so much more important than quantity, he should guard against overlabor, against attempting too much in his own line of duty, against accepting other responsibilities that would unfit him for his work. That's such a hard saying. So many of us want to do so much good. How can we do all the good? We can't. We simply can't. Someone wise once repeated someone else's wise words, saying to me, "The enemy of best is good." You can spend your whole life doing good and never doing the best thing that God wanted you to do. Which is why you simply can't commit to everything. Saying no to good things is the way that you say yes to best things. And it's one of the hardest things to do. Especially when people don't understand. They'll ask you, "This is a good thing. Why won't you help me? Why won't you give this money? Why won't you give your time?" It is written elsewhere that time is money, and wasted time is wasted money towards the cause of God. Many people who do not realize that that expression, time is money, was used under inspiration. Yes?
I remember you talking before, and you had said that indecision is something about just the harms of indecision.
Yes.
And I remember I was at GYC, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with this, but the guy who made the sermon, one of the sermons, he said the enemy of best is good. Or wait, he said it the opposite. And the reason he said that was he said so many people are they might want to do the best, but then they don't end up doing anything because they don't think they can do the best.
There's a balance for sure.
Yeah.
And the quote, there's a powerful quote that goes like this. It says, "Long delays," it's in Gospel Workers 133. "Long delays tire the angels. It is even more excusable to make a wrong decision sometimes than to be continually in a wavering position, to be hesitating, sometimes inclined in one direction, then to another. More perplexity and wretchedness result from thus hesitating and doubting than from sometimes moving too hastily." I do not want to tire any angels. I want to take action. I want to, at times, like Obadiah is saying, do something good rather than do nothing. Thank you, brother. So, we'll continue past this. So we're going to go to Testimonies of the Church, Volume 4. This starts on page 651. Any of these quotes that you can ask me, I'll share my presentation if you're interested. Starts off by saying that the young should be controlled by firm principle, that they may rightly improve the powers which God has given them, but youth follow impulse so much and so blindly without reference to principle that they are constantly in danger. Since they cannot always have the guidance and protection of parents and guardians, they need to be trained in self-reliance and self-control. They must be taught to think and act from conscientious principle. We are all children. We all should be taught to think and act from conscientious principle. She also writes that those who are engaged in study should have relaxation. Many of us think that study is good. You cannot have too much good. But it is written that much study is a weariness to the flesh, that the physical organs of the brain will be overtaxed by too much study with not enough fresh air, not enough movement of the body. The mind must not be constantly confined to close thought, for the delicate mental machinery becomes worn. You can't go to Humans Are Us and buy a new human part very easily. I hear kidneys are very expensive. Brains, I don't even know if brain transplants really are a thing. I don't recommend them. I think taking care of the brain we have is a better plan. The body as well as the mind must have exercise, but there is great need of temperance in amusements, as in every other pursuit. And the character of these amusements should be carefully and thoroughly considered. This is the distinction here. Is what you choose to do with your so-called free time recreation, edifying, like proper rest, or is it vain amusement? And we're going to be exploring that. Every youth, we're all youth, every person should ask themselves, what influence will these amusements have on physical, mental, and moral health? Will my mind become so infatuated as to forget God? Shall I cease to have His glory before me? She goes on to say that card playing should be prohibited. I come from a past of, some of you know this. I used to be a competitive card player. I played a game called Magic the Gathering. It's a fantasy card game so overtly satanic that there's pentagrams in the very artwork. If you line up the dots on the back of the card, it makes a pentagram as well. It's a very dark game with literal demons as part of the game itself. Literal cards that say summon demon. It's very, very overtly evil, very dark. I competitively played this game, and you'll notice what she says about these environments. Evil angels are guests in these places. There is nothing in such amusements beneficial to soul and body. There's so many quotes, I'm going to go over some of them. One of the quotes I found most true is that this was very true for me, that those who engage in card playing become intensely excited and soon lose all relish for useful and elevating occupations. This was so true to me as well, because I started off just a casual, 14-year-old card player. I later found this gentleman who, people often say there's always a master and an apprentice. I found my master of card playing, and he taught me the ways of the game. He taught me how to cheat if I wanted to cheat. He taught me how to play well if I wanted to be honest. He taught me always to have a story lined up for your lie, because if you're ready to lie, then it'll look like you're telling the truth. This was the kind of education I was getting in card playing. This was the kind of people I was meeting. And he's a lovely person now. He's since quit the games as well, that game. But this was the type of learning I was receiving. Notice what it says. Expertness in handling cards will soon lead to a desire to put this knowledge and tact to some use for personal benefit. When I was 14, 15, I started gambling in the card shops, and I learned how to exchange my $5 entry fee for either 3 packs of cards or the equivalent of $12 in store credit. I was doubling my deposit and then some. That small gambling led me to going to tournaments that they were giving out $5,000 in prizes. There were people who professionally played this game, and they made their living essentially gambling. And I was deep into this world. To this day, if you Google my name and search hard enough, you'll find these tournament results. See, a small sum is staked, and then a larger, until a thirst for the gaming or gambling is acquired, which leads to certain ruin. And that was the path that I was headed down. She speaks very solemnly, saying, how many has this pernicious amusement? And you can substitute any pernicious amusement for card playing. Any sort of video gaming, idolatrous video gaming, any sort of television obsessive use, any sort of social media app that you overuse, any sort of misuse of anything God has made is sinister and dark and leads us to what I've come to call this familial hedonism, where you care about family, or at least you say you do, but really you're just selfish. And family, you might care for family. Anyway, it leads you down a path that is completely contrary to agape love. And we know that God is agape. God is self-sacrificing love. She writes that among the most dangerous resorts for pleasure is the theater. We carry around theaters in our pocket. We have basically, like, when Christ, let's go to Matthew 4. Some of my favorite parts of sermons are parts that were unintentional. And this wasn't expecting to go here, but look what is written in Matthew 4, verse 8. And the devil taketh him up to an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. It was required in that time that he take him up to an exceedingly high mountain, but if I just climb up here, and I look down at my phone, he can show me all kinds of wickedness right from on top of this chair. I don't even need to stand on the chair. This is a window to light or a window to darkness. It's a tool just like a hammer. You can build a house or you can harm. You can do horrible things. So instead of being a school of morality and virtue, as so often is claimed, it is the hotbed of immorality. Vicious habits and sinful propensities are strengthened and confirmed by these entertainments. She goes on to say a lot of the consequences of these theatrical amusements, even to say that they blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life. No influence in our land more powerful to poison the imagination, to destroy religious impressions, and to blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life than theatrical amusements. How many of us are might be standing in front of the most beautiful sunset, the most tranquil waterfall, the most incredible scenes of nature, animals in front of us, incredible things are happening, beautiful flowers are before us, and you see somebody goes like this. It's a tragedy. And it's not just technology. There's all kinds of other things that people end up in, but I mention it because almost everyone has a smartphone these days. Brother Abraham's one of the only people, he said he did not have one, right? He was the only people I know that does not have one. My friend Bruce, he still uses it's not even like it's not a smartphone in the same way. It's a very, very, very minimalist phone, and I respect him for that because he is able to glorify God. And I'm not prescribing abstinence from technology at all. I'm just saying it's a luxury and a risk. It's a tool and a temptation.
Could we easily say that this could include Christian theatrical performances?
Really. Absolutely. It's a matter of the utmost. It's essential that we use discernment in our evaluation of the things that we look at. For by beholding, we become changed. If we behold Christ in his word, in communion with him, if we look to him and his character, we will become agape. We will become self-sacrificing love. we're told that everything we need to know about the Father is revealed in the Son, for it is written, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, said himself, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." Have we seen Christ? Are we looking at Christ, or are we looking at something else? The love for these scenes increases with every indulgence, as the desire for intoxicating drinks strengthens with their use. Just as one drink lends to another, one vain YouTube video, one vain movie leads to another and another, there's no amount of counterfeit comfort that can truly satisfy the soul, for the true comforter, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, is the only one who can fill that void. That throne on our heart will not be filled by anything else. So the only safe course, she says, is to shun the theater, the circus, and every other questionable place of amusement. These are modes of recreation which are highly beneficial. There are modes of recreation which are highly beneficial to both mind and body. An enlightened, discriminating mind will find abundant means for the entertainment and diversion from sources not only innocent, but instructive.
I guess, Michael, what I was, maybe you did kind of answer this, and we don't necessarily have to get into the nitty-gritty of everything, but I know that for a while my family was really into watching like Christian movies and different things. And some people excuse going to the theater because it's a Christian film. There's a lot of different shows about Jesus and things like that. And not saying that it's still, I do think God is still using these things to reach people, but then we have to ask ourselves, I think, is this the highest possible thing that I could be doing to bring myself to God? Like, would be reading a book have more of a impact than watching this movie, although it has a few inspirational elements to it?
Sure. Yeah, I hear you, brother. And I'm not here to say thou shalt not look at a screen. I'm not here to say there is no art that is edifying. I'm not here to say phones and videos and movies are all dark and sinister and there's no place for such things. I am here to say, find out for yourself if it's rubies or rabies, because you don't want rabies, and that's all I'm saying. So, yes, if Ben, if you could help me with this next section, this next quote. So this is from section 17 of Adventist Home, starting chapter 80.
What shall we play? Substitute the innocent for the sinful. Youth cannot be made as sedate and grave as old age. The child is sober as the sire.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. One of my favorite quotes is from Education 296. It's also in Mind, Character, and Personality, but the quote is that something better is the watchword of education. It is the law of all true living. Whatever Christ asks us to renounce, he offers in its stead something better. Often the youth cherish objects, pursuits, and pleasures that may not appear to be evil, but they fall short of the highest good. This is the best good thing I was saying. They divert the life from its noblest aim. Let them be directed to something better than display, ambition, and self-indulgence. Let them know that to honor Christ, to become like him, to work for him, is the life's highest ambition and its greatest joy. There's so much to say. This happens to me often where I'm like, okay, this is what I want to tell the people. This would take like a month. And I can't do it. So bear with me as I somewhat abridge my own sermon here. Yes, please read. I can't read everything to you. My Pastor Ben, he said something very, very true, very powerful, and he said that in reality, every sermon, every act of ministry is a effort. It's an invitation, really. I don't know how you worded it. How'd you word it?
Yeah, I mean, every sermon that we preach is an invitation.
Yes, every sermon that we preach is an invitation to read the books, he says, and it's so true. The role of the preacher is not to be your audiobook, but to be your exhortation. And if a woman is to preach, she is to invite, but not to chew everything for you. There's a point in the bird's life where the mother chews all the food, but the goal of chewing all the food and feeding it to the child is not so that they need do that forever. We are to mature, we are to get beyond the milk of the word and be able to chew the solid food for ourselves, and not just chew the food, but learn how to find it, learn to grow it, learn to harvest it, learn to collect the truth. Many people here are supporters of what's come to be known as the 14 rules of interpretation, also known as Miller's rules, and it really is the foundation. And I have a free booklet, anyone who wants one, that includes the 14 rules of interpretation, and they are Bible principles on Bible study. They are the pathway to truth. For the fourth rule, for example, is gather everything you want to know on the subject presented. So, and if you can form your theory without contradiction, you cannot be in error, is what it says. So there's far too much. I don't want to overfeed myself or others. So I'm going to try to emphasize some key points, and we can be amused perhaps, or at least find some humor in how ambitious I was with how much I wanted to share, as I skip over lots of stuff. Okay. So while we restrain our children from worldly pleasures that have a tendency to corrupt and mislead, we ought to provide them innocent recreation, to lead them in pleasant paths where there is no danger. While we shun the false and artificial, this is a something better concept, discarding horse racing, card playing, lotteries, prize fights, liquor drinking, tobacco using, phone overuse, you could add all these different things. We must supply sources of pleasure that are pure and noble and elevating. You cannot just tell someone to stop doing something that they spend their whole day doing and expect them to be like, oh, I stopped drinking for 8 hours a day. I'm just going to sit here and not drink. It simply doesn't work. You need to invite them to drink from the fountain of Christ. I like this quote. She writes, I do not condemn the simple exercise of playing with the ball, or playing ball, she writes, but this, even if it's in its simplicity, may be overdone. So it's not like basic things are inherently wrong. I like to say the principle, and I think it's in 1 Samuel 16. Someone can find it if they want to help me. But it's the verse where it's the outward appearance verse, where Samuel goes to anoint the king, and God says to Samuel, look not on his outward appearance, for man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. So many people could be doing the same thing. You could see people playing with ball outside and be like, how dare they play with a ball during the appointed times? And they could be perfectly innocently doing so. Whereas others could be idolatrously doing so, and we don't know. Judge not lest ye be judged. Let us be reasonable here. Maybe talk to someone privately and invite them to examine themselves. More ambitious sharing of mine. This is the famous quote that the football and boxing have become schools of brutality. They tend to, like this is in general, vain amusements tend to destroy a relish for life's sober realities and its tranquil enjoyments. This I wanted to emphasize. So in early ages, like 150 years ago, she was saying in early ages in the 1800s, so she means like even longer ago. In early ages with the people who were under God's direction, life was simple. They lived close to the heart of nature. Their children shared in the labor of the parents and studied the beauties and the mysteries of nature's treasure house. It's interesting, whenever treasure house is used, it's synonymous with armory in the Hebrew, which I really like that word. It's not really related. And in the quiet of the field and wood, they pondered those mighty truths handed down as sacred trust from generation to generation. Such training produced strong men. In this age, life has become artificial. She said this like at least 100 years ago. How much more artificial is life now than 100 years ago? And men have degenerated. She said men have degenerated 100 years ago, and it's even worse. While we may not return fully, I'm not advocating Amishness. There's definitely some virtues. While we may not return fully to the simple habits of those early times, we may learn from these lessons, them lessons that will make our seasons of recreation what the name implies, seasons of true upbuilding for the body and mind and soul. She here gives an example of taking family outings, having the whole day devoted to recreation every so often. Perhaps during the beginning of the month, at the first day of the month would be such a good time for such an activity. She said even the ride, the exercise, the scenery will quicken the appetite, and they can enjoy a repast which kings might envy. Sometimes I wonder how I think this would all fit, but it's okay. Notice this principle, that all he requires us to give up is that which would not be for our good and happiness to retain. He's not telling you to give up anything good. He's telling you, I have something better for you. I love you so much, I want you to thrive. He desires that we should enjoy nature. There's profitable social gatherings. This is all section 17 of Adventist Home. It's not the whole thing. I tried to abridge it, but clearly not enough. This is more example of Christ. The greatest benefit is not gained from exercise that is merely taken as play or exercise merely. There's some benefit derived from the being in the fresh air and also from the exercise of muscles. So there's benefit to outdoor exercise. We should encourage people to be helpful. We should do outreach. There's things we can occupy ourselves. She notes that she asks this question, shall we have no, or she says, they may inquire, shall we have no amusement or recreation? Shall we work without any variation? And she says, a change from physical labor that has taxed the strength severely may be very necessary for a time that they may again engage in labor after having recreated, putting forth exertion with greater success. There's so much truth, and these slides demonstrate the quantity of that truth that I just simply could not possibly be temperate in my delivery and fit all of this here. But she says recreation, when true to its name, recreation, tends to strengthen and build up, calling us aside from our ordinary cares and occupation. It affords refreshment for mind and body, and thus enables us to return with new vigor to the earnest work of life. Amusement, on the other hand, is sought for the sake of pleasure and is often carried to excess. It absorbs the energies that are required for useful work and thus proves a hindrance to life's true success. There is a great need of temperance in amusements, as in every other pursuit. we should ask the question, what influence will these amusements have on physical, mental, and moral health? Will my mind become so infatuated as to forget God? Any amusement in which you can engage, asking the blessing of God upon it in faith, will not be dangerous, and that's what we should look for. But any amusement which disqualifies you for secret prayer, for devotion at the altar of prayer, or for taking a part in the prayer meeting is not safe, but dangerous. And there's a lot of amusement to be found on devices. I find that, especially in relationships with God, there's times where we need to take our amusement, we need to take our distractions, take perhaps a spiritual cage, and lock it away sometimes, so that you can have time properly with your family. Yeah. I like to put the key somewhere farther away, like outside the house or something, to keep them separate so that you have time to like really contemplate before you just open it up. This cage you can just like shake it out or reach in, but it's symbolic, so. So I ask today, in this era where there's more fun things to do than any other time in history, why scientists point that there's more depression than any other time in history. Statistically, and I wanted to get the chart, but you can find it yourself, studies show that depression has skyrocketed since the advancements in technology, and there's an obvious correlation. These are some serious images, but this is like the solemn reality of where we're at, where the machine has become master to the maker. We've become slaves to our own creation, whether it be phone use, tobacco, alcohol, whatever it is. And I'm no perfect man. I smoked tobacco for years, and it was a hard thing to stop. People compare tobacco quitting with things like heroin. Just the craving for tobacco is so intense, and I know that personally. I speak preaching to myself as a man who's desperate for recreation, desperate to seek the true comforter, desperate to flee from all counterfeit comforters of vain videos, vain scrolling through my phone. For in the times of darkness, in the times of overwork where I was so exhausted, like that quote from Education, I found that almost irresistible tendency to depression, and I yielded to that depression. And I sought comfort in dark things, in the video, in just videos, whatever I comfort myself with, and nothing filled me. Television is described by the founder of the Satanic Church as the satanic altar of the American household, because it's a box where anything you as yourself want to see can put on there. It's like a self-worship device if used like that. We can use it to glorify God. I'm not saying burn your television, but did not Jesus say, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off? Yeah, programming, channeling, channels. It's very interesting, the language that's used. So the question is, and we're closing here, is that I don't know what you do. And that's why the verse I want to close with is, I don't know why it's not there, it should be there. The verse that calls us to examine ourselves. Perhaps someone can help me find it. Yeah, that one. Because we are a people in need of great self-examination. Are we seeking after rubies and finding them pleasant recreation, precious things, or are we finding rabies instead?
Marie found the verse.
Thank you.
Yeah. 2 Corinthians 13:5, Michael.
Okay. Examine yourselves whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves how Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates.
Thank you. A good indication, I'll get off this raccoon, it's kind of unsettling. A good indication of what we are doing, if it is good, is if we have the Spirit of the Father and Son dwelling in us, or if they've been evicted. Because you cannot serve God and mammon. Two cannot walk together unless they be agreed. If the Father and the Son are not in agreement with your behavior, he cannot walk with you. There are places he simply cannot go. So are you seeking rubies or rabies? That small distinction of one letter. Notice that we can have hobbies, or what I have chosen to call hobbies from hell, or hellbies. Again, a small distinction of 3 letters. Are our hobbies leading us to the celestial city, or are our hobbies leading us to hell and separation from God? Because separation from God does not begin after death with the ultimate separation from God, but separation from God begins the moment you step somewhere he cannot go. So my exhortation today is examine yourselves. I need to examine myself. I am no perfect man. But it is God who worketh in me both to will and to do of his good pleasure. So I thank you for listening, and I invite you to, those who are able to kneel and or bow your heads with me in prayer. Father, we thank you for the privilege of prayer. Help us to have discernment. Help us to walk with you, to walk by faith. Increase our faith and help our unbelief. Bless the remainder of our assembly together during this special time of the year, and we praise you and rejoice that you are so much love, that you are willing to help us be transformed by the renewing of our mind, to be in such a condition that we can be agreed and that we can walk with you, and that you wink at our ignorance and invite us to come up higher. We thank you and praise you and invite you to be with us the rest of the day, the rest of our lives. We lift up our family and friends and pray that we might see them all in the kingdom, and pray for all people that are suffering, we pray. Amen.